Mr. Taylor Barras is Speaker of the House, Louisiana House of Representatives. Mr. Taylor, how are you this morning? Thank you for joining us.
I'm doing fine, Robert. It's great to be with y'all.
It seems that the special session, to use the phrase of many, it sort of came off the rails. And it was described as, well, let's start with Representative Alan Seabaugh from up this way. He said it was a boondoggle and a waste of time. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we had lots to discuss as when the governor made the call, and we reviewed the items in the call. We knew there would be lots of room for deliberation. So when you have $1 billion worth of revenue that's scheduled to roll off the books on June 30th, we knew that the hill would be high to climb. But at the same time, we have economics and, of course, federal tax changes that are coming into play that are truly changing that number. And I think that continues to change for the better as we approach June 30th. So, a good bit of noise in the number as we continue working forward. But we were clear that after the governor made the call, and I pinned a letter to him in January, explaining that for any revenue having an opportunity to gain Republican support would certainly need to include some budget and spending reform ideas that we wanted to implement, which we have tried over a number of years, and for one reason or other they fail or he doesn't offer support to them. So this was our opportunity as a conservative delegation to work to get some of the budget spending reforms that we had been working toward tied to any revenue that we would consider renewing. Mm-hmm. And of course, most of this revenue that was on the table were not new revenues. It's a matter of, do we renew what we have or do we lower what we have, and those decisions. So, a complete waste, I wouldn't paraphrase it that way, because I think we had an opportunity to talk about how we lower our expenditure limit in Louisiana, how we, offer a transparency site to show where our money is spent. So we did have good time to talk about budgeting and spending reforms, which have never been the mantra of this administration. So not all lost in the end, but yeah, a disappointment that we couldn't get a little bit further.
We had Commissioner of Administration Jay Darden on a couple of days ago, and he was, to say the least, not the least bit hesitant to point fingers at whose fault it was.
And his arrow was headed your direction.
Hang on just a second. We've got the soundbite from Mr. Jay right here.
Well, there was a plan going in. There was the reason we had the special session is because the Speaker and the President and the Governor all agreed on what would be in the call and what would be done. The Speaker had agreed to a plan that would have raised almost what the Governor had requested to close the gap.
The Speaker had agreed. Is that accurate?
That's not exactly accurate. What we had been working on through the fall with the members of the GOP and even a joint retreat that we had with Democrats during the fall, knowing what items would be discussed. They're the same revenue measures that they have proposed since 2016. So no new items on the agenda. So as the governor and I continued to talk, certainly we knew what the framework would look like and what the possibilities were, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure our reform measures were on the forefront, because there was no way the GOP was voting for $1 billion in taxes. They weren't voting for $700 million in taxes. There would be a negotiation somewhere in there as long as our reforms were included. And these reforms were significant. I mean, the two or three that had to do with Medicaid efficiencies, a form of work requirement, a form of income eligibility tightening, which is badly needed. The copay one is introducing a copay, which is complicated with mm-hmm. providers. So, I mean, all of those things were well discussed, and actually the governor offered his support for them and included them in the call.
Taylor, let me ask you this: you might tell me to go jump in Lake Pontchartrain. But when the governor talked about all the cuts he made, the $600 million, then the $900 million, was he being deceptive or wiggly a little?
Yes. I mean, when you have departments that have a large backing of statutory dedications, not every department has that luxury, but a lot of our departments do, to the point where some of our departments do not use state general fund at all, because their fees and their self-generated income supports them. They don't need state general fund. For those that do use state general fund, when we do cut their portion of state general fund, a lot of times we call it a swap of finance. They're called a cut, but they use their stat debts to fill the hole. So there is no service interrupted. There is no one laid off. So their version of cut is they made departments make $600 million worth of adjustments. They were a long way from cuts. That's the misnomer in a lot of those discussions. Mm-hmm. For departments that have statutory dedications, they can transfer the money and use that instead.
Yeah. So what kind of number are you actually looking at in your mind? Is it the governor's $900 and something million, nearly the $1 billion shortfall that he says? Or is it in the range of the $400 to $500 million like some House GOP guys are telling us?
Right. And I think that's important to talk about because the governor had started and continued until the last day of the session that it was $994 million or nothing. And, that was a concern to me all along. If you include, and this is certainly an estimate that our economists have offered as to what change the state could expect as a result of the federal personal income tax change, that number is about $302 million. So if the Revenue Estimating Conference does indeed recognize that as potential revenue, that drops that $994 million number to $692. That to me is the accurate number. That is the shortfall that we will not be able to fund. Now, part of that, what was on the House floor last week to be considered was a combination of revenue measures, renewal of a fourth of the penny, which actually drops the sales tax by 0.75%. Those combination of items totaled about $430 million. So not all of that had the potential to pass, but if 300 to 350 million that passed, you're down into the 260 to 300 million dollar range of a hole that you're trying to close, which I think most Republicans feel is an exercise that we need to go through with the respective departments to see if those cuts can be ascertained. So,
what now? Another special session after the regular?
Yeah, you guys go back into regular session, I guess, on Monday, and the governor's already suggesting, he's saying, look, let's adjourn the regular session and go right back into special session. Why? Do you think there's any chance that anything different will happen?
He has proposed that to the president and I that we consider ending the regular session early. Those discussions are still being held to be able to spend another 2.5 or 3 weeks in May, at the end of May, to continue to discuss it. Other than what do you do with sales tax? Because quite honestly, that's where the bulk of the dollars are to help with this shortfall. I think as you get to a revenue estimating conference meeting somewhere in the April-May timeframe, you recognize the $300 million. There could be other economic improvements that are out there. I'm not sure it's $250 million worth, but I think some dust needs to settle on truly what revenue estimates are for 19 again, and determine if that's something we address in a second special session. To say that there'll be 12 or 15 revenue items that make it back to the table, that will likely